before, the organizing committee here is listed, and I want to thank all of those people for their hard work. Then there were people who provided a lot of their effort, like Wendy and Laura and Anurag. And then there were the participants were also asked to help, and they did. And then we had a bunch of volunteers that also helped. And overall, the thing worked, and we actually managed to get to the deliverable. Next slide. So today's agenda is that first, Mike is going to talk about the CMMC Academic Advisory Council working groups. Mike, please go ahead.
Why, thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, we'll send these slides out to you all very shortly, but just to give you a little bit of backstory, Jody, I think you're on this as well. There's a Academic Advisory Council to the CMMC accreditation body, and this was formed, it's been about a year now. I think it was last November or thereabouts, maybe a little earlier we started. It was a good faith effort in partnership with several EDUCAUSE help, Koger help, and some amenable folks at the CMMC accreditation body. We had been talking to them for ages that, you know, guess what? A university is not a defense contractor in the way that Northrop Grumman is. And you really have to sit down at a table and talk to us. I think we've been pretty successful about at least opening the eyes of the accreditation body. So they formed this AAC, and we've been beating on them for a long time now that we need working groups, because the membership is great on the advisory council, but it's a pretty broad group. A lot of the folks that are there are focused trying to help the AAC, or excuse me, the AB deal with training and communications. And this is what happens when you miss a meeting. I missed the meeting 2 months ago, and sure enough, they decided on the working group. So either I was actually the problem, or I wasn't there to go, wait a second, how about this? So we finally got our act together, and we're forming 3 working groups that will sit helping support the work of the AAC. And the deck that'll go around is exactly what you're going to see. There are 3 groups being formed. That's pretty descriptive in the slides as to what each group will focus on. So for example, this first group is looking at the costing models. One of the things that the AB has not fully appreciated is how nuanced and tricky it is to account for costs related to cybersecurity in contracts and grants. And so this is not really a group focused on cybersecurity or technical controls, but it's the mechanics of how different institutions are going to fund CMMC compliance and how to account for the costs in the course of operations. So you'll see in there, it's not say, hey, we want a bunch of CISOs to sit at the table. We're really looking for finance people, folks that are familiar with award and post-award funding. You know, I'll give you an example. When Carolyn and I were wrestling with UCSD around how to fund our CMMC program, one of the most useful people to show up at the table was the business officer for San Diego Supercomputer, because he'd been involved in cost recovery processes and understood this workflow quite a bit. So each of these working groups spells out precisely the kind of person they're looking for. We expect to have too many people volunteering. So what we're really hoping to do is get people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and do work. We really don't want them to be working groups where a lot of people show up and lurk for the sake of lurking. So this is the first one that's going to happen. Go ahead and Carolyn, go on to the next one. Next slide. There we are. So the other one is, and this is helping the AB a little more, they're very interested in how some schools can help them get elements of the CMMC program embedded in their curriculum. Some of that's pretty straightforward. For example, our extension office offers CMMC training. They're one of the approved groups for that. But, and I don't know if this is going to be super appealing to the big R1s, or maybe to the either community colleges, extension offices. The R2s might be more interested. But you can see here again, they're looking for people that will help them figure out what it means to embed CMMC work into curriculums and programs. Same kind of thing. We hope we get more people than we need, so we can winnow it down to folks that are really prepared to do some hard work. And then on the last one, education awareness. One of the things we've been telling the AAB is that they're doing a terrible job of explaining CMMC to the universe. And we all struggle explaining CMMC internal to our institution. Some of us are doing that better than others, but we've emphasized to them that they should work with us in developing the materials that can explain to leadership in your organizations, explain to faculty in your organizations, explain to partners in your security office what CMMC is and what it means. And so this third working group is looking for people you can see really focused on communications professionals, program managers, etc., that want to participate there. Now, you'll notice none of these descriptions describe the artifacts of each working group or the cadence of how frequently they'll meet. The goal is to identify the members, start meeting, and determine at those meetings what the most effective deliverables will be and how often they need to meet. So go on to the last slide. And again, you don't need to copy this down. Carolyn will be sending it out if you haven't got it already. After the 12th, they'll be set up to take submissions at that emailing list or email address. And we're hoping by the end of June to let people know what's going on. What I would really emphasize, though, as you're sharing this information, and please do share it as broadly as you feel, as you'd like, really emphasize to people to not just say, hey, I'm interested, please put me on a group, but to underscore what they bring to the table and why they're concerned. Because we know there's, we'll end up with 30 people and no one will do any work. So we really want people that are wanting to be parts of a working group. And that's about it. Questions? I haven't been reading the comments, so Carolyn, Eric, if you want to, if there's anything in there.
Let's see.
Looks like we have two of them.
So how long is this submission window open for?
I think it's going to be about a month, because you can see they say, let's start after May 12th, and we'll contact people by the end of June. So the idea is, I believe we have an AAC meeting sometime in the middle of June where we'll winnow this down. Jody, doesn't that sound about right, what we discussed?
Apologies, but I missed the last meeting also, so I can't help you out there.
So we need a working group on getting Jody at the meetings.
Yeah, I will be there.
And are the goals related to the national security? There hasn't been any formal correlation there, Mike, on connecting the two. But this community, we deal with every possible regulation and every possible dimension. So it's hard to imagine there wouldn't be some overlap that comes out of it, but not formally, let's put it that way.
All right.
And feel free to contact me directly if you have any further questions. I have got a fair number of responses from people after I sent it out to various lists that they're interested in planning to submit. So vote early, vote often.
So do you have an idea of how big a group they think it is? I think you said that maybe it was 10 people.
Yeah, we were shooting for, on the order of 10 to 12 per group.
Yeah, okay.
But, it's hard to say, are we actually going to get 40 people for one group and 3 for another? We just don't know. So we'll just have to wait and see. So I've been pushing these out to groups like the research compliance groups, APLU, the Stone Soup group, just basically any group that's involved, not just the pure play security professionals.
I'll also ship it out tonight to everyone on the RRCoP mailing list.
Excellent. Thank you. I think this group is a terrific resource, and I think we'll be coming back to this group frequently for other working group membership.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. So here, I want to go back to our workshop. I already sort of pointed out some people that I really thank for all their efforts and made it a success. Now I want to go and tell the community a little bit of what the workshop did. So basically, we wanted to have a very specific goal, and the goal we decided on was to write a template for an SSP. Of course, we did it, and it was an SSP for compliance with 171. That's relevant to the CMMC effort. So we know there's a total of 110 controls. Since revision 3 wasn't out yet, we decided on basing it on revision 2. That was reasonable. And we couldn't do all 110 controls, but we picked a set of controls, and it turns out we have 42, which is a good smattering of controls. We picked some of them that were easy and straightforward, and some of them that were a little bit more complicated. So then what we wanted was to have a good sort of collective view on what are different institutions doing for these controls. And the writing, of course, was not perfectly streamlined in beautiful sentences, but we do have a lot of information. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we try to address in this workshop is that everybody is writing an SSP, and the SSP is always considered restricted data, so you cannot just openly share it. So what we wanted to have is a template so that people who start off on this journey and are tasked, hey, I was hired at University X, and I'm supposed to write an SSP for some of our systems. How do you do that? What's in these systems? Now you can read some of the generic documentation like NIST 818 that says, how do you write a system security plan for federal information systems? And, you know, that's not necessarily the best place to start. I mean, it's good if you have lots of time, but it doesn't necessarily apply to an academic institution. So we wanted to get everybody together and get something that is relevant, that you immediately resonate with. Is yes, these are the kinds of issues we have at our institution, and this is what other institutions have said they are doing about it without revealing any of their sensitive information. Next slide. So that was the objective. This workshop will create a portion of the SSP developed through consensus with peer experts, and then document a set of controls. Yes. And the controls that we picked, the ones that are in dark are the ones that we really focused on, and the ones that are in lighter color, we sort of put there as sort of an example. So we have one control for identification, and one for incident response, and one for media protection. But the ones that are often the ones that require much more discussion and agreement within institutions on how to implement and enforce and write policies about are access control, audit and accountability, configuration management, risk assessment, security assessment, system communication protection, and system and information integrity. A total of 42 controls. Next slide. So the way we organized this, we had 6 controls per table. There were 7 tables, and we had about 60 participants, and they were grouped. There were 2, since we had 12 controls in the access control domain. 2 tables dealt with access control, and then there were some, you know, as you can see on this slide, that were sort of spread out to make sure that everybody had about the same set of controls. And we also tried to make them equally difficult. There were some that have like a one sentence answer, and some of them that have like a whole page. We tried to balance the amount of work so that it could be done in 2 sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Next slide, please. So in order to make this really work, we had a very tightly constructed agenda. We had prepared the controls, so nobody had to argue about what. We gave all the tables their role. We had a mechanism of a parking lot, which meant that if during the discussion of the 6 people at one table, they came to a control or an aspect of a control that there was no immediate consensus, and that was sort of measured by time. If the discussion kept going back on and repeating itself 5 minutes or longer, then the leader, the master of ceremony of the table, would basically make the decision. This is a parking lot item. And then we would create a sticky note, write down that item, and we would stick it on the side. And that was our parking lot. And these are items, we have a number of them that will be discussed at future ways, maybe some working group or another workshop or whatever, but they basically were not going to hold up the process. And everybody was handed a printed reference in a PDF file of the 171A, which is the assessment guide. So 171, 800, 171 is the actual list of controls. And then the 171 assessment guide for each control lists a bunch of questions. Sometimes there's only 2 or 3, sometimes there are 8 or 10. And they say, in order to meet this control, an assessor will ask you, do you have set this particular parameter? Have you published this paper? Have you defined this boundary? Have you whatever? And then we had a custom collaboration space on Google Drive where people could share. And then we had made sure that the people had a lot of expertise. That was part of the funding from the NSF grant that is funding this regulated research community of practice. We had some funding whereby we could invite and pay the registration fee for participants. And as part of the selection criteria for how you would get this award from our process is that you had to show the correct level of expertise. So that meant that the people in the room were all pretty knowledgeable. And then we had 2 people of our own who were available. They had taken the CMMC assessment training, and you could just ask them questions like, what would an assessor say about this? And we got excellent expert advice from them that helped get a lot of things unstuck very quickly. Next slide. So what we focused on was the CUI basic in the Defense Federal Acquisition Rule Supplement. And then that's a little bit more limited than the generic CUI from as it is defined in the executive order. Then we specified an enclave IT infrastructure to avoid all the complexities of architecture. We just picked one and told people, this is the structure you should think about if you have any questions about how to implement a particular control. And it's very easy once you see it, how you can augment or change or translate. So like if you want to put your cloud, your enclave in the cloud, that's perfectly possible. If you want to have a hybrid environment, that's perfectly possible. It just makes the complication of writing it all down, which would be a distraction to get as much done in this workshop as is possible. And we provided data, an architecture diagram, which I think is going to be shown in one of the next slides. So next slide, please. And there it is. So we basically say, well, this is your, in the top left corner, there's your endpoint. That's how you access it. Then you get to the boundary of the system. The boundary has a VPN, it has a firewall, and it has a data transfer capability. These all talk to each other and check each other. There's a storage system that you can get stuff to, and then there are the resources inside the environment, which may contain databases, computing processes, storage systems, and then there are all kinds of software tools that are available to allow you to manage the security and observe the networks and the activity and do accounting and all that kind of stuff. So this gave all the participants a common architecture to think about, so that we didn't go off on little details. And if the details were relevant, then that would become a parking lot point. Or if they were relevant, general, and had a generally accepted solution, then we would write down that generally accepted solution as specification inside one of the controls. Next slide. Also, in order to give people some guidance of what kind of information is required, we basically gave an example of one control that was filled out, and it was 311. And here we give the general information, and then there is following the assessment guide. You can see there's part D, part E. That's how the assessment guide is organized. They ask for a specific question that you need to do, like system access is limited to authorized users, and then you specify how you do that or whether you do it, and that gave everybody an idea of where what to write and how to write it. And that seemed to have worked very well, because everybody produced a lot of text by the end of the day. Next slide. So basically, the way the day worked is, first we spent about an hour on general instructions of how does it work, explaining people what I'm explaining to you now. Then we gave the scoping, which is that enclave system. Then we gave everybody at the table a set of like 5 to 10 minutes time to just introduce each other, so that all the 6 people at one table would know each other, and you can get going. And then we had 2 different sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, where people would discuss the controls within the table. And then after a period that was timed by the overall master of ceremony, all the work at each table would stop, and then a select person from each table would present what the table had discussed. And this happened in the morning, and then in the afternoon it happened again. And it turned out that that worked out very effectively. I think we were very lucky that the teams had a pretty good idea, and they all selected good scribes and presenters. And the sharing of the information of what was done at each of the 7 tables was very effective and very informative for the whole room. So after the morning session, everybody had a very good overview of what had happened in the past hour or so at all the tables, and learned a lot. And then in the afternoon, we did the same thing. And then we had a short closing session from our roving auditor to give some thoughts and ideas on what's happening in the auditor field, and how auditors look at certain things, and what you need to do when you're writing an SSP to think of anticipating what the auditors want and how you answer them. And that was very informative. And then we had a closing and it was done. Next slide. So by 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which is when the workshop was ended, we basically had created 42 controls. And the way we had divided it up is that all the controls that one table had to work on was put in one file together with all the other controls, but the other controls were then not edited or touched by that group. And then the organizers merged these files into a single one, which we will share after this meeting. And then we had already shared in the briefing sessions. So everybody had a very good idea of what happened during the day at the end of the day. And then in that evening, we had some sort of a mixer for the whole conference. That's part of the EDUCAUSE conference. And we already got a lot of comments from people that they really liked the experience. Next slide. So now, several of the people, I am sure,
Zoom recording. All right.
Actually, there's an interesting question out there.
was gonna say, there's a
Would
question
would
out
it
there.
be possible to replicate the workshop around the country and develop more examples? And we talked about that, but we don't have an answer yet because the amount of work that went into this workshop is not trivial.
Let's cover that at the now what stage, because
Okay.
and that is a really valuable question, but I definitely would come with some parameters on that too. And so, yeah, let me think on that. So, since the workshop, though, we did bring all of those 7 documents, the child documents, back into their parent document. And I've retained that there is a Word document of everyone's discussions, so that this included everything they saw at the workshop. This was the discussions, the concerns, and the responses to the controls. And what I was going to do for the group that attended that workshop was I was going to send a separate email with, okay, here's still the links for your content, as well as if you'd like to have access to everyone's discussion points, elements like that in one file. But where I struggled with was what to share out with the public versus what not to share out. And you'll, as we even found in the link that we have provided there, it was slightly oversecured. So I do worry about it growing legs, and that's something else I'll start sharing as you start seeing the document. I'm going to flip which I'm sharing, but I put a header, a footer, and a watermark on it. We also have a Creative Commons license on it now, but my worry is that vendors could pick up on this and start running with it. And I would like all of that work very, very much attributed back to the 60-some people who made that document and made it reality. So with that, let me stop sharing on that and swap which one I'm sharing. We have, is it this one? This one. All right. So the link we have in the bottom of the Google Doc comes to this page. And we have a little bit of the abstract. We have the title, abstract. We have everyone who helped participate, who did not opt out of authorship, as well as the institutions involved with crafting this document. I didn't want any attribution from that this was a one-to-one thing, that we know Emily added things from Anderson University. So I was trying to keep them separate. Then here is the document that has been significantly slimmed down, because I also didn't want anyone just treating this as, okay, here is my SSP, move along, nothing to see here. And turns out this needs to just be an amazing document that can help your own SSP. This is never going to become your cut and paste SSP. So with that, here's a Creative Commons license. And I also stripped out any content that we had not specifically worked on in this in the workshop. So we did include some of the system architecture. We talked through that, as well as the architecture that you did just see. Then we flipped down straight into the controls. And so, as we mentioned, here was the example one that was done prior. But each group, here is their resources that they contributed during that day. And to that, whether spelling errors or, well, partial content exists, that is what existed during the day for the workshop. And I want to make sure that, no, this isn't pressed or, well, validated in any capacity. And I also wanted to make sure that this was in the footer because no, what we did has not passed any assessment. This is just where we are at this moment. And I know, yes, so many disclaimers, but I do recognize the power of this document that we made. So in this, you'll see all 42 controls that we worked through during the day. The colors are pretty much how the groups knew which controls were theirs. So colors were built by the same group. Some groups obviously had larger tasks than others when you start getting to like part O, and some of them just had part A and B. But this is the PDF version of it, and I'm guessing, I mean, I'm not quite sure how to handle whether there's comments, whether the revisions. This is all coming pretty fast toward, we just finished this. Hot off the presses, but then I do also keep the attribution in here as the last page. Same list that you see above. To give the preview of the fact that the other document does exist. So here is what we truly talked about in that session, and I've had that merged into a single document. And there's a lot of things in the discussion that we really didn't do post-processing on. And before any of that vanishes, I did want to make sure that we've kind of cleared that space. So I wasn't making this a publicly accessible document at the moment. It was just, at the moment, it's too fresh, but maybe these things will also come into how we work next. Let me flip back to the other one and finish that out. So as you saw, here's where it's located. I expect more comments and feedback as you guys start investing your own eyes on it. There were a lot of topics that came up that we didn't have a nice endpoint to, and instead of having that stall out work on the SSP that we were all working on, we chose to make those as parking lot items. And here's actually the ones that came up in the parking lots. And a few of them I'm sure you've all seen or questioned or had zillions of conversations around too. But for example, the separation of duties when you have such a tiny team and someone has to do it all. How are you truly crafting those different areas for that person to be, all right, you are now working on this security side. Oh, you're now auditing your own work. Another big one that we got into some interesting conversations around was how much do you want to load your SSP up with versus how much do you want to reference other documents, and then how do you maintain or keep each of those up to date in whichever fashion you've chosen. So I think that one is definitely primed for further conversations, and let's see what maybe we're doing in that space. But I think it is really interesting. I mean, it took this group coming together to realize what some of these big challenges that we're all struggling with are. The user developed software, that one we went back and forth on, of the actual purpose of research often is I have developed software. Well, guess what? Is it meeting all of the controls too? Oh, well. So for that, I was thinking there'd be a few different venues that we might work through some of these, what was look like moving forward on. There's the 800-171 community group, which I suspect with the drop of 800-171 R3 just got a little bit more lively. And we're also thinking that this might involve, we might do some working groups or white papers on some of those harder topics that came up in the the white paper. I'm kind of open to where does it go from here? Is this something we need to finish this out? Is this plenty as a reference there? Would it be wiser to tackle some of those parking lot items? And I guess that was sort of where I'm game for pretty much any feedback around here is a better way of securing it. I've considered, should we put it behind EDUCAUSE and have it behind an EDU type of address? I mean, there's a lot that could be done next. And so essentially last slide, if you haven't seen it, yes, this is RRCoP. We have institutions around the country. If you haven't joined the Slack group, I now just changed it since from we have upwards of 800 to we have upwards of 850. Join us